Here's the non-prosecution agreement that was made with Epstein. The United States shall provide Epstein's attorneys with a list of individuals whom it has identified as victims.
But the government did not need to turn over those names to Epstein nor to his attorneys.
And then later on, we learn from the survivors themselves that Epstein's lawyers and his team harassed them, and then also gave them a heads up on their lawsuits against him so that they could find out who was going to sue him and they could start researching, looking for dirt on them and stuff like that.
Part of the agreement was that a list of victims, Epstein's victims, would be turned over to the people responsible for administering any recovery.
Now, right there, as a former federal prosecutor, is that unusual to agree to turn over that?
Yes, it is unusual, and it's unusual that it would be part of a plea agreement to, in lieu of being prosecuted federally, you are going to agree to pay money to these victims. Now, to me, that sounds like buying off the victims, which is, to me, offensive. I find that offensive. It is not unusual as part of a plea agreement if someone pleads to this, to XYZ, and then there will also be restitution of X amount. That can be part of it. But where you are essentially saying, in lieu of prosecution, you will pay these victims. That's a bit different.
Yeah. And I mean, there could have been a scenario where they could have created some sort of independent fund and Epstein gives money to that fund, and then that money is distributed to victims without him ever knowing who they were.
Exactly. That could have also been done that way. And where there is some review board of, who is entitled to this money without any input from Epstein, but where there is a review of the victim's claims, and if the panel who is reviewing it believes that there is sufficient evidence that that person was a victim, then they would be participants in the recovery. That's not unusual. I have seen that happen.
Yeah, but so I think that shoots down any notion that they needed to give him the names of the victims so that he could pay them restitution. That wasn't necessary.
He didn't need to know who they were. I mean, you would think that he would at least have some idea because he's the one who victimized them. But so that, his lawyers, if they were going to contact them, could have done it on that basis just by getting names from him.
And another aspect of this is here, they're giving Epstein the names of victims who they are not even telling they had made this deal with him.
Well, I don't know that for a fact, but everything we have read seems to show that they were not telling the victims what was going on.
Yeah. So we can presume they weren't even told that their own names were being handed over to the person they're accusing.
Well, we don't know that for a fact. I don't know that. But I have not read anything saying that they were told.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose they can tell us that. Somebody needs to ask them. Oh, one thing I wanted to get your perspective on, having worked in the Department of Justice, is a lot of people point out, and it's a fair thing to note, that Epstein was prosecuted, was indicted under the Trump administration's DOJ. And Correct. A lot of people say, well, how could you say that he's covering up for Epstein when he's the one that finally indicted him? And Biden didn't, Obama didn't do it. It was Trump that did it. But how much of a connection would there be there? I mean, in terms of, does Trump really get credit for having indicted Epstein?
Trump was president at the time. I don't know whether he would have had any involvement. Who knows? I don't know.
I mean, if he ran the DOJ like he's running it now, if he didn't want Epstein indicted, he would have just called up his attorney general and say, you can't do that. Well, you can't speculate about why they wanted to turn over victims' names to Epstein as part of this deal. But put it this way, can you imagine any legitimate reason the prosecutors would agree to turn over victims' names in a situation like this?
I think that if you are going to have a situation where there is going to be an agreement that victims will be compensated, there has to be some way to decide who those victims are. There has to be a record of it. And ideally, the government will be in the position to know who those victims are and should have a record of it. The idea of giving it directly to the perpetrator is really a bit much. Now, certainly his attorneys should have some access to it to know, but there does need to be some accounting. And so you have to be sure that the people who are being compensated are in fact victims. And so there has to be a way of managing that. I have seen it done where there is a confidential group and there is compensation of those victims and a distribution of funds anonymously, so that it is not public knowledge who's getting that, nor that the defendant would have any means of interfering with it. His attorneys might have some right for review of it, but with the understanding that it not be shared. So,
yeah, and there would be some public purpose going forward and encouraging a scenario where perpetrators pay restitution to victims, but it can be done in a way that they're not allowed to harass those victims.
Well, that is part of it. that is certainly part of it. Now, in the federal system, there is, for the most part, mandated restitution to victims where there are victims of crimes. That doesn't mean they always get it, because most defendants don't have anything that they can pay out. But restitution is a part of almost any sentence in the federal system where there is a victim, where there is a clearly identified victim.
But that would be after there was an actual trial and conviction.
A trial and conviction or a plea agreement.
And in a trial and a conviction, they have to turn over the names of witnesses.
If the person's going to testify, yes.
Yeah. But what was unusual here is this was totally pre-trial. This was just a non-prosecution agreement. So he had no need for the names of the victims. Even if he wanted to pay restitution, it could have been done without him knowing their names.
Right, correct.